Welcome to the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast with me, Dave Roberts. This week, I'm exploring the topic of cybersecurity. Cyber hacks have increased dramatically during the last year and have now become a regular boardroom agenda item for discussion. It is therefore critical that all CXOs understand the risks associated with IT security breaches and the enormous impact it can have for an organization. I'm delighted to be joined by Rowan Troy, who is a senior cybersecurity consultant with Littlefish and also the sponsor for this podcast episode. It's great to be talking to you today, Rowan.
Thank you very much for having me.
Brilliant. So Littlefish is predominantly known for providing managed IT services, but there's also a really strong capability to provide cybersecurity services. So can you tell me a little bit more about the organization and the role that you play?
Certainly, yep. Littlefish, as you know, probably has been around for around about 10 years now since its new ownership takeover in 2010. We're operating out of Sheffield and Nottingham. We've got about 450 staff in total at the moment, around about that. And it was very clear to the business a number of years ago now that the cyber market was obviously booming. It was growing. A lot of their customers were asking, can you do this? Can you do that? Etc. And so the business took the opportunity there to invest off the back of the success of the managed service provider piece to essentially engage the cyber market and build out a cyber operation. So I joined at the beginning of this year, beginning of 2021, and so far we've had some really good, successful wins in the cyber market, and we essentially have more than doubled the number of customers we've had this year, which is obviously telling of the fact that cyber is becoming a very, very fast-growing industry. It's changing all the time. There's so much going on. From my own experience, I ran a managed service provider company back in 2004 onwards. And I was there for 13 years. And that's where I got my sort of tech background from. And then our company was acquired and then decided that, I'm going to make the switch to pure cyber. I've been doing lots of bits and pieces around, cyber for my customers, with SIEMs and things like that. But then I decided that in 2017, I was going to make that pure switch. So that's where I come from. And then ever since then, I've been in the cyberspace for that length of time.
Fantastic. So not all businesses can afford to have full-time security experts on staff, though. But we can't ignore the cyber threats that continue to emerge at such a rapid rate, as you said. So how can Littlefish help with these types of organizations? How can they help support them?
It's an interesting one because I think if you look at the market today, you look at the people in cyber, there's this image of cyber people being complete nerds, geeks, hoodies on sort of thing. But I don't think that really applies to everyone. And it certainly doesn't apply at the CISO level, I don't think. So, we recognize as an organization that, as you say, not everyone can afford a CISO. Does everyone need a CISO? Not entirely sure. Do they need an information security officer maybe? Who knows? But, what we do is organizations that we work with is we establish what's the need, what's the driver for having someone of that nature in the business. And then we provide that for our virtual CISO service. So our virtual Chief Information Security Officer service, that's its title, but it's actually a little bit more of a blend. And this is what we like to find as our unique selling point, I guess, is that we've got those CISO-esque experienced individuals that can come into an organization. They can really establish what's it look like today, what's the state of play, which is always key. And then we can work out a roadmap of over a 12-month period. And that organization has access to that VCISO for a set number of days every month throughout the year. And they don't have all those FTE running costs. If you look at the CISO salary range, it can go from anything from £90,000 a year to beyond scary money, as I like to call it. But it's very, very expensive to have some of that nature. So what we do is we provide a pool of those people. And generally, there's a one-to-one relationship. We like to try and keep our VCISOs one-to-one with our customers. But sometimes, that can't happen due to holidays, etc. So we've got a pool of people. We make sure those pool of people know about the organizations, the work we've been doing, and the roadmaps that we've built. But also we can draw on a pool of talent, not just that VCISO, that very high level sort of strategy, architectural type piece. We can actually draw on cyber engineering as well. And we've found quite a number of times we've gone into an organization, we'll do the assessment piece, we'll do that high level holistic overview. And then there's this need for, maybe a technical resource. We have someone slightly more technical, someone more engineering of site in cyber. So maybe they've got a platform they want to deploy, or they've got a platform that's already deployed, it's not working right. They need to change that or fix that or modify that in some way. And so what we do is we use those vCISO days and we have a blended rate for that, and we bring in that cyber talent. So we've got that technical person there that can take maybe 1 or 2 days a month instead of that vCISO person who's very much that holistic person, but maybe doesn't have that real deep technical understanding. So that's the flexibility of our vCISO service, which really appeals to a lot of people, because they see vCISO and they think, oh, well, that's going to be my governance, risk and compliance kind of person, the GRC type person. But actually, I really need that. And we was like, well, let's sub that person out, let's put them on the bench, and we'll bring on a fresh pair of legs.
And do the virtual CISOs, they work hand in hand with the on-site teams as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We tend to find that if there's an on-site IT presence, if there's an on-site information security presence, then yeah, absolutely, we work with hand in hand. We will always try to engage with all those stakeholders, because it's very key that the relationship is transparent and it's open. And we are trying to be that impartial voice for people. We're trying to get people to realize these are the gaps. And maybe it can be difficult because people in an organization don't want to be seen as, oh, they haven't done this or they haven't done that. We're not here to point fingers. We're here just to highlight those gaps and work with these people to make sure they understand how to fill those gaps. And whether that's with technology, whether that's with process, whether that's with people, it doesn't matter to us. It's just important that we work together harmoniously.
Well, I think that's great that you've got resources there that can help both operate at the sort of C-level or director level within an organization, but also then get down to the grassroots and work with the on-site resources to help defend against these cyber threats, really. So
yeah, exactly that.
Excellent. So I know Littlefish have also developed something called the Critical Hour Framework as a cyber response. So can you tell me more about this, and how do we have this in place to ensure that we've got well-rehearsed cyber responses?
Yeah, so the key, I'd say, with any sort of cyber response is to have a plan. We need plans. I think if you talk to anyone in the cyber industry, they love a good plan. I love a good plan. And I think that the point of that is to make sure there is a clear line of communication for one, but also a clear line of responsibility, because some organizations that I've been to, there's no real determined responsibility. People don't really know what they're responsible for. And that's all the way down from top level all the way down to your end user. What's their responsibility in the plan? So what Littlefish developed was the Critical Hour Framework, and this was a playbook approach to incident response. So when an incident is detected, we have a playbook for that type of incident that says, okay, this has happened. This is now who needs to respond, who needs to act, and this is the chain all the way down to essentially resolution or isolation, shall we say. So the idea is after detection, the CHF, the Critical Hour Framework, will kick in, and we've detected that incident and we'll work through that process. And it's a well-rehearsed piece of work. We sit down with the customer. We will establish who's going to be responsible for what, how much reach Littlefish will have in an organization to be able to take action. Because some organizations we work with, they like to do it all. And we're there just to be that alert and response type piece and to make them aware. Other organizations want us to deep dive in and they want us to take action, maybe disable an account, maybe block a particular bad IP or bad website. So it's really dependent on what the customer wants. And we're quite flexible with that. There's no hard feelings if we're not allowed to, jump in. But most of the time we find that us being able to respond immediately is obviously going to be the faster option than trying to pick up a phone or send an email address. So having that well rehearsed, those thought out processes into a playbooks, we will then be able to ensure that we act as quickly as we can, and the customer is aware essentially of what actions need to be taken by them, what actions we'll take, and then hopefully we'll get to a point where we isolate and then we can remediate.
That's exactly what I discussed recently on one of the podcasts, really, and talking about having those well-rehearsed playbooks in place for people to understand where the roles and responsibilities are, and having perhaps like a RACI matrix in place so people know what their responsibilities are should there be something like a ransomware attack occur or something like that. So
100%, and that's where it is for us, and that's why we developed the CHF. Our aim is always to complete that isolation piece to the point where we can start to remediate within the first hour. That's the critical hour. That's where it comes from. It's that first hour to prevent anything further from happening. It's been detected. We need to stop the spread. We need to stop this activity. And as far as I know, touching some wood, we've never missed that hour so far. So we know it works well. And we understand that customers have got different approaches to different things. They use platforms differently. So that's the important bit, is that we make sure it's tailored and it's unique.
Plan for the worst, I guess.
Exactly.
So if organizations need to deploy something more advanced and advanced protection for their organizations, what else can they do to provide those sort of ongoing cyber defenses?
So again, traditionally, we've got lots of different tools out there, and there's lots of different products, and they will all say they're the greatest things in sliced bread, and it's, some of them are very, very good. But what we find is that, you do still need that human element, and that human element needs to be able to interpret information and data as quickly as possible. So we've developed our CSOC service over the last few years, and it's a 24/7 monitoring service that allows us to really get the log data, but not just the log data, it's the user data, it's the behavioral data, into a central location where we can establish a framework and essentially a foundation of activity for that organization. And then we can start to alert against those anomalies. So I know a lot of people perhaps listen to the podcast will have heard of the term CSOC, would have heard of the term SOC, would have heard of SIEM platforms, etc. And yeah, there's lots of them out there. And there's lots of people that do this out there. We're not alone in this field. But the key bit for us is that making sure that you've got that human element that can interpret those logs. Because if you think of the devices you've got on your network today, even just in your home, are probably generating hundreds of logs a minute. And so having a human try and go through those logs, impossible. Not enough time in the day, not enough hours in the life to do that. And we know from a compliance point of view that there is always a element of, do you review your logs, and how often do you review them? Certainly with things like 27001, that is a key element in there about reviewing logs. So having something like a CSOC service is key. And I think that's the bit where you need those people to keep your eyes on essentially the network and the activity going on whilst the business is doing what it does best, which is whatever the business is doing, whether it's selling product, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's retail. That's their part. That's what they play in their space. But what they don't really have is that expertise of being able to decipher those logs, decipher those events, look at the user behavior, see what they're doing. And with our approach, we use a public cloud solution. It's not on premise, so we can actually take those logs directly, or we can put sensors into organizations to take those logs centrally. And we've got a single pane of glass at our end where we can see all of our customers. And we develop that service continuously. It's constantly developed. As we know, cyber doesn't stop. The threats keep changing every day, every week. And we have to keep up with those latest threats with that research. And we put all of that research across all customers. It's not just dedicated to one. But we've also got what we call an essential service, which I think is probably one of our key points, is that we believe there is definitely space for smaller businesses to have CSOC operations, and it can be an expensive outlay for most organizations, but we've developed an essential service that we feel covers sort of 5 key areas that can give real insight into what's happening in a business. And those 5 key areas are across things like Azure AD and Active Directory, Office 365, the primary firewalls, the endpoint solutions, and the VPN solutions. Those are all going to be core services for an organization's business to run every day. And that's where most of the activity is going to occur. Most of those logs are going to come from those 5 key elements. So we feel that the essential service is something that's very commercially affordable for a smaller organization, but also gives them that protection and that ongoing, shall we say, proactive view of what's going on in their network today.
Fantastic. That's really useful. So it's also very important to develop the long-term risk mitigation strategy to help ensure that you have appropriate cyber governance within an organization. So how is Littlefish helping to strengthen organizations' cyber vulnerability management?
Well, I think in combination with our cyber assessment piece as well, and also from essentially from our ongoing works when we work with as a VCISO organizations. Vulnerability management is one of those things that I think everyone knows they have to do it, and they know they have to be looking for the vulnerabilities, scanning, using tools, using pen testing. So it's a well-known fact that those things need to be done, but they can become pretty monotonous. They can become very stale. And deploying patches and things is probably one of the biggest pains I think I had when I was a techie back in the early 2010s. So we know it's not exciting. It's not the most fun piece of work to be doing. But we use a cloud approach. We've got cloud-based agents that allow us to directly install agents to network devices, to servers, to workstations, etc. And we can run scans as frequently as anyone feels it necessary. Generally, we do one a month, but we can do it more frequently than that. And we provide all the reporting at the back end of that. But we've partnered with a very interesting and cool company called Planet Pentest to kind of bring a different approach to vulnerability management. And using their platform, it gives us a much better idea of the risk. And so what Planet Pentest is doing for us is giving us a unique view of the world when we do a vulnerability management piece with the customer. But also we can draw in penetration testing results as well that the customer may have done with us or may have done with another third party. And then it brings all of that information into one central pane of glass, which then allows us to say, okay, what are the risks? We know vulnerability scanners are going to say, well, this vulnerability scores on the CVSS as a 10, but does it actually mean much to the business if their risk appetite isn't aligned to that CVSS scoring? Maybe it's aligned to business operations, say. So I think what we're trying to do is get away from just using the common vulnerability scoring system as a way to say, right, this vulnerability is a 10, we must go fix it. That vulnerability may not be exploitable, for example, but there may be one that's slightly less higher scoring, so maybe down at maybe a 7 or an 8, and actually that's very easily exploitable. So it's making sure that we can actually get the right vulnerabilities to the top of the tree, fix those, base that on our risk appetite and our risk management process, and then focus on the ones lower down. Now, generally speaking, most CVSS vulnerabilities that score a 10 probably are going to be a bit of a problem. But I'm just trying to make it clear that it's not just based on whatever the score, the tool, or the CVSS determines that vulnerability. It's actually based on the risk to the organization. So we take a very risk-based approach to vulnerability management.
Absolutely. I think that sounds like a very sensible and pragmatic approach to it, really. So how should we be educating our staff to recognize the threats of cyber attacks and for them to understand more about phishing and lots of other socially engineered attack methods as well?
Well, this is one of the hottest topics, I think, in our space. There's always this adage of people are the weakest link. I don't think people are the weakest link. I've moved away from that over the years. I think there is an element of people having the ability to essentially take an organization out by opening an email or opening an attachment that they thought was genuine. But also I think there's an element of the security training. There is the awareness and the training that needs to be addressed. And if the awareness and the training is no good, then yeah, sure, the people are going to be the weakest link. There's no denying that. But it's down to the organization to make sure that the awareness and training is effective, make sure it's actually making a difference, but also make sure it's relevant. I think we see so many organizations just push out, a training module, or they might get someone in to do that training in person, and it will be the same stuff. It will be GDPR, it will be data protection, it will be passwords, it will be clear desk, clear screen type piece, which is all very important. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's not important, but it can become really stale. And it can become really sort of, I do have to go and sit through this training again every year. So what we've decided to do is partner with Cofence, and we provide intelligence-driven training. And what that means is that instead of just pushing out training modules because they are the core concept subjects, we're trying to establish an intelligence-driven model. So with Cofence, we run phishing simulations with our customers. We see what the results come back as, how many people interacted with that email, how many people interacted with the attachment, etc. And then we look at saying, well, how many are clicking links and how many are opening attachments? How many people are actually getting rid of the email? And we're looking at that data. And then what we're doing is feeding that intelligence into the learning management system, which then brings up the appropriate modules to say, right, actually, 40% of the organization opened the email. So maybe we need to have a training module, recommends a training module based on what to do with emails that look suspicious. And then if people are interacting with attachments, there's an email, there's a training module about attachments. If it's things like MFA, and this is the classic one that I've been talking about for a long time now, is that people implement multi-factor authentication and they think, yes, my organization is now safe. People are going to have to press a button on their phone, or they're going to have to type in a text code. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work out like that, because what happens is you'll get a high-level individual that maybe not tech savvy. He's got MFA installed on his phone. He goes on holiday and he's getting prompted by the phone to log in, and they just get annoyed. So all they do is just press yes. And there's no training. If they haven't had any training on how MFA works, they've just let that person in. And I've seen it a number of times this year where people have just sort of seen it and go, oh, is that me? Oh, yeah, I'm just going to press yes, even though they're sat on a barge somewhere or in a hotel somewhere, and they're not logging into their computer. They're just pressing yes because they want to get rid of the annoying alert. They just want to get rid. So it's really it's key that training and to be aware of the socially engineered attacks. And I know a number of social engineers through my contacts with LinkedIn and people I've met in the real world, and they're very clever. They are trying their hardest to get into places. So we need to make sure that the training around physical security is just as important as the logical stuff. And so again, one of these things you can do is you can gamify it, and that's the cool approach to, I think, to learning, because it can be a bit more fun than just sitting in front of module after module after module, passing the exam at the end or the little quiz at the end. If you can gamify it, it makes it more interesting, and people will engage with it. And I've seen organizations do things like offer Amazon vouchers for the top scorers and things like that. So I think it's key that an organization really engages with the training program, incentivizes it, but also make sure it's relevant. Make sure it's relevant to how your organization works.
I really like the idea of gamifying it. I think that's a really good bit of advice there. So that's one I'll look more closely at. So for organizations that want to demonstrate to their customers and potential new clients that they have a really good IT security posture, and we see this requirement coming up in bid questions and proposals for organizations to be Cyber Essentials Plus or ISO 27001 certified. Yeah, how can Littlefish help organizations on this road to compliance?
So we've got a number of ways, and I think as I touched on in the vCISO space, that as we engage with on the vCISO level, we'll always try to complete a cyber assessment at the beginning if one hasn't already been done by that organization from the get-go. So some organizations might go away and they'll do that as a one-off piece, and then they'll come to us and say, look, we've had this cyber assessment, really don't know where to go, but we need to get to this level. So, we might take that information from that report and then extrapolate that into a roadmap, or we might perform our own assessment. Just depends on what level of detail they went into. But the key thing for us around cyber assessments is it provides that state of play today. It gives that snapshot in time of this is where we are today, and identifies those gaps. And then if people have got a target, like getting to Cyber Essentials Plus, maybe getting towards ISO 27001, or maybe they want to reach a sensible level with something like the CIS Top 18 or even the NIST CSF, we can work with the organization to create that roadmap of how they get there from the point they're at today, which maybe they're down in a scale of 10, maybe they're at a 4, and they need to get to a 6 or 7 in order to get close to ISO 27001 and 8 and 9, getting up to the big NIST CSS or the NIST directive piece. The key thing there is making sure that there's engagement from stakeholders. Leadership is needed. It's a core fundamental within 27001. Say that leadership needs to be on board, and there needs to be driven by senior stakeholders in the organisation. These frameworks and certifications, shall we say, don't work unless the leadership's involved. So from our perspective, we will conduct that assessment. We'll do that gap analysis. We'll then write a remediation plan that says, okay, at the moment, this is where you're at. This is where you need to be if you want to meet this particular requirement, and this is how you can get there. And then we'll work with the organization and say partners very well with our vCISO service, because we can provide that constant drive, that sort of almost nagging to say, come on, if you want to get there, this is what you need to do. But also we're not there to nag, we're there to try and help and bring in the right resource. And maybe that brings in a resource from our cyber team, maybe that brings in a resource from the infrastructure team that or a professional services team. Maybe there's a deployment that needs to be done. And that's the beauty of working with us, is that we've got all of that expertise in those areas that we can just draw on, and we can bring in and say, right, we've got an infrastructure person who knows, Linux, for example, or we've got infrastructure team that know essentially Mac endpoints, which keeps coming up all the time now because everyone wants a Mac because they're trendy. But it's being able to draw on that through that assessment piece and say, well, this is the gap you need to fill. This is how you can get there.
Excellent. So if people want to find out more information about Littlefish, what should they do?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do. As the cool kids say, you can slide into my DMs on LinkedIn. I see that often on LinkedIn. People say slide into the DMs. It sounds very odd, but yeah, cool kids say that. So you can absolutely reach me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with anyone. You can visit our website, littlefish.co.uk. It's got all of our services on there, and the cyber services has got its very own special dedicated area where you can look at the cyber services that we've been talking about this morning.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today, Rowan, and just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for sharing those fantastic insights and just generally your cyber security experience. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me.
Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and stay tuned for more inspiring tech leaders.